It's Klayton, aka Celldweller, and I'm here today in collaboration with Vintage King Audio to talk to you about the Elektron Analog Keys. So Elektron has hit it out of the park with making really compact boxes that are very powerful for production. And they've added to that legacy with the Analog Keys, which is a 4-voice polyphonic analog performance synthesizer. It's got 37-key velocity-sensitive keyboard with aftertouch, an assignable XY joystick with a push button. You've got a pixel backlit LCD. You've got MIDI and out and through, CV control. This thing's packed with a ton of modulation sources and destinations. There's a lot you can do with only 4 voices. But there's an aspect to this that makes this even cooler to guys like me and maybe people like you. Let's talk about Elektron's Overbridge technology. Overbridge is Elektron's proprietary software that allows connectivity between the hardware boxes and your digital audio workstation, which is whatever program you're using in your computer. So they've created a VST or audio unit plugin that allows you to directly connect to the keyboard or whatever box uses Overbridge, and you don't even need to touch that piece of hardware if you don't want to. So I want to show you today how to do that and why. So for starters, you have Elektron's control panel, which allows you to set settings here. You can change between 16-bit and 24-bit. And as you will notice when I'm changing that, that will actually change the number of inputs and outputs you can have. So obviously if you're doing a higher bit rate, you're going to get less voices, but you can configure all of that stuff, your ins and your outs, you can configure that through the control panel. When you get into your DAW, so I've got Cubase here and I'm loading up the VST of the Analog Keys Overbridge plugin. And here it is. You've got pretty much everything you need to control that piece of hardware right here in front of you in the box. You have your automation from within your DAW to be able to control that stuff. So it makes it, for me, a lot more flexible and useful because I can control many parameters at once by kind of dialing them in the box using automation. So up here you see your 4 voices. You've got 4 tracks essentially, and you can pick a sound for each track if you'd like. The other thing you can do, which I have done in this example, is split each voice out to a separate output in my DAW. So I can actually process each sound on each channel separately using plugins, etc. You can go over to the sound browser here and dig through hundreds of presets where you can kind of narrow down. You want a bass sound, you want a lead, you want a kick drum, a snare drum, whatever. And you can load them into your slots by dragging them from here up to one of these slots and create basically a performance, which is 4 different sounds. So I've done that. And you'll see on my first track I have a kick. So for instance, I picked a kick. I ended up using an amplitude envelope to tighten up the shape of the kick. And of course here you can see there are many settings just for whatever sound you have plugged in. You've got your oscillator types, you've got filters, lots of filter types and options. You've got effect sends here, and the overall volume of that channel you can set down here. You have modulation sections here, which you can assign different modulation sources to different modulation destinations and change the amount. Bipolar, so you can have negative amount or a positive amount by using this wheel. And so I won't bore you with getting into the nitty-gritty there. I think for the most part you can understand that, or you can dig into more tutorials to see more of how that works. But let me show you what I've done. After I've loaded 4 different sounds in here, I've got a kick drum, a hi-hat, kind of like a lead type sound, and a bass line. Now you've got 4 notes polyphony here, so that means you're only really playing 4 voices at one time max, but that actually sounds like you're limited, but you actually can get a lot out of that because this unit has a big sound. So here you go, here's my kick. Then what I ended up doing is dialing in a little bass pattern, which I wanted to augment, and I'll show you how I did that in a second. I ended up tightening up that sound using the amplitude envelope as well, so I had this nice plucky, attacky kind of thing. But it's not cutting through the mix the way that I would want. So what I ended up starting to do is outputting each sound on its own channel in Cubase. So I have my kick here, my hi-hats here, there's my lead channel, and my bass. So for instance, this bass sound, which I'll solo, kind of punch that up a little bit. So what I ended up doing is instantiating one of my favorite plugins, which is the FabFilter Pro Q, boosting the top end a little bit. And I'm also sidechaining this to the kick drum, so every time that kick hits, I'm kind of pushing the low end of that bass line out of the way. So there, just by doing that, you're not hearing the kicks, you're not hearing the sidechaining, but you can hear how much brighter that is as far as the top end. And then I was like, I want to augment that a little more. So what I ended up doing is actually sending that to another one of my favorite plugins. I have many favorite plugins, which seems like a paradox. Echo Boy by Sound Toys. So here you go. Here's what it sounds like with a little Echo Boy on it. And now you're hearing that wider stereo delay kind of happening on this thing, which is adding some life to it. So now let's throw that in with the kick. Then we get into the lead. So I've got this lead sound here. And I dialed up a pattern. The great thing here is you do have a step sequencer built into the analog keys, which you can use, but I'm actually controlling everything from within Cubase. So all of my MIDI, all kinds of parameter control, including this, which I forgot to mention on the bass line. Let me show you how I added a little more life to the bass line by adding automation. I do have the bass line sending to a reverb, but instead of leaving it wet the whole time, I wanted to occasionally automate the send so that I'm only sending to the reverb in spots. So this is what it looks like here. You can see here are my automation points, and you'll hear now with just, I'll solo the bass line, and now you're going to be hearing that bass line occasionally sending to the reverb, which is going to add a lot more dynamic to the sound. So as you can hear, that reverb is coming in spots and kind of creative spaces, and now one single sound is taking up a lot more room and is much more full. And all this is possible because of the Overbridge technology. So in a similar way, I am also automating the frequency cutoff on that lead sound I just played by adding automation in Cubase. So I do have some automation here that is changing my filter cutoff position. You can see that happening right here. So I wanted to bring a hi-hat in now at some point in the track to kind of lift the energy a little bit. So here's the hi-hat. And again, it was a little dry for my taste, so I said, you know what? I want to add some effects to that. So what I ended up doing is adding another FabFilter Pro Q to cut out any low end that may be in it, and adding another Echo Boy to the hi-hat. So now we've got this, which seems subtle, but when you pop it in, you hear the difference. It just feels a little more produced to my ears. So now we're actually starting to build a track using this wonderful piece of hardware, but we're only accessing it through the DAW, and we're never actually having to mess with the physical hardware if we choose not to. So now, as you can see, I've got 4 voices kind of going here, 4 sounds, 4 tracks coming all out of the Elektron Analog Keys. And by adding a few extra subtle sounds, which I just brought in as audio, like a crash and then like a little snare kind of loop, I started to build a track from a very small set of sounds. This is a quick example of how you can build a track with just 4 sounds, 4 tracks, right out of the analog keys. With some extra production in there and a few extra sounds, you've got a track and a quick start to it with great sounding oscillators, great sounding filters, which you can also run external gear into. So you can run external content to the inputs and use the filters, etc., in the analog keys. And it also has CV control, so if you have a modular rig or any of the modern keyboards that are supporting, or old analog keyboards that support control voltage inputs and outputs, you can use the analog keys to interface with those. Thanks for sticking all the way through this episode of Celldweller Production. I hope you learned something valuable about the Elektron Analog Keys, and if you want to grab one up, head over to Vintage King's site and they can get one to you stat. There's lots more of this content on my channel, and there's a lot more coming, so subscribe to my channel or save this playlist. And until next time, this is Klayton, aka Celldweller, Circle of Dust, Scandroid, signing off.